So let's start about history of coffee with me. I started roasting coffee probably, I'd say 7, 8 years ago now. And I built, I want this to be a discussion along with talking about, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about this because because the first question I would ask anybody is, has anybody here tried roasting coffee yet? Like either a show of hands, or I can't see everybody now because now I'm, hey, Michael, Mike's here. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else? No.
I have, Ross.
Yeah. And they're oh cool, I got an actual hand raise there. So I was going to start it with just talking about my journey through coffee started off in the same place that yours is going to start off. I want to roast coffee myself, right? So where do I start? And I start with building a roaster. I start with a whirly popcorn popper, and then I move on to wow, there's got to be a better way than this, and I move on to another kind of popcorn popper, and then this like rotisserie one, and then I get another rotisserie grill and build that, and then I go into air. There's lots of different ways of roasting coffee. I mean, it's and we'll get into coffee and the construction of coffee in a little bit. I'm gonna jump around a lot. I as much as I try to organize this the talk about coffee is longer than the talk about making beer, because it's just days of subject material, from talking about green coffee and then how it's processed, and talking about and then going through the roasting and the stages of roasting and what you're looking for and all that stuff. So I figured let's just start with where I've been and what I've roasted on, right? And got to a point, and I want this to be kind of like a Q&A. I also want to make it 2 parts, where this is part 1, and then I want to have a club meeting where everybody comes here and roasts. You can either bring your green coffee with you if you have your own stuff and you say, hey, I want to bring a few pounds of coffee and I want to roast it on a good roaster and see what it looks like and what it tastes like, or you can go buy green coffee, or you can, this is what interests me, this is what I like, this is what I've experienced and I've roasted myself. Let's go try and roast it on something else and see, but I figured that we could do this in 2 parts, where, hey, I talk about it a little bit and get Q&A going, and then we have a second. I know, and it's all going to be on what everybody's comfort level is around standing around a roaster and taking turns on it, roasting batches of coffee for a night. But that's the direction I would like to go. And because there's a lot more you can learn hands-on on the process and everything by doing it. But I built probably, I think, 8 or 9 roasters I have at home in all different various states of repair. Somebody's got a bling. Anyway, something just happened. Where did I go?
I think that was just somebody joining or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, we can still see you. Hear you.
All right. Well, I can't see myself. There we go. Okay. Yeah, don't do that. Beautiful.
Don't hit the leave button.
Yeah, don't hit the leave button or else you're out of here. And all of it was to get to a certain point to say, okay, maybe I should try. One of the most common roasters I see out there is a B-more. I've got a few of them. If anybody is familiar with it, it's a B-E-H, I think it's M-O-R. They make coffee machines too and whatever, but they have it looks like a toaster oven roaster. And if you were going to start with a roaster, that would be the first one that you're actually going to get decent coffee out of. But can you roast coffee? You can roast coffee in a frying pan. I've done that. That's kind of messy when it starts to get the first crack. But I went through a whole myriad of roasting machines to get to a certain point with saying I couldn't wait to get to an actual real roaster. that actually was a drum roaster that spun, and it actually was designed to do coffee. But I got a lot of good coffee out of different things, but it's hard to know what you're looking for, and how fast to roast it, how you're basically cooking something. You know, you're taking coffee from a green state, right? And what happens to coffee from it being green is it has about 10% moisture, and you're taking coffee and it actually starts the cooking process starts to remove moisture.
Economic recession, historical social unrest. We're seeing it happen more than ever. Following a 3-month hiatus, the president restarted
That's not me.
his oil briefings yesterday. In the past, these briefings.
Excellent. That's gone. Thank you. So anyway, you got green coffee. You're running somewhere between 8 and 10% of moisture content in green coffee, and you're removing all that moisture. And then after it's done removing, it starts to expand, and then it keeps going through a whole bunch of chemical reactions and starts getting bigger until it cracks. It's just like almost like popcorn, right? And it gets to a certain point where it can't hold on to whatever's inside it, and it expands and it cracks the bean. And that's what you heard the term first crack. That's where it comes from, is it's expanding that coffee to a point where it's at first crack. Now, after you get to, you can try and drink it before first crack. It's gonna taste weird. But when you get to first crack, is usually the sign where people start either, you start to get to a lighter roast, right around that first crack point. And then as you let it go is where you start to get into, they call it into like a city, and then a medium roast, and then a full city. And then you start to get into, when you start to get the full city, you start to hear a second crack. All right, this is the bean cracking again. And in this time, it just keeps getting bigger. The coffee will take up almost double the amount of space that from when you started roasting to where you're done, especially if you get into second crack. It's double the amount of space. So like when you buy at the store and you buy 12 ounces of roasted coffee, right, in a bag, that was a pound to start. That was a pound of green coffee, and when you're done, you get about 12 ounces out of it. Depending on what, how deep you want to go and how much is expanded. But that's kind of the road. Now, lots of different ways to get there, and from a general roasting perspective, what you're trying to do is get through the stages of, I started with the green bean, it's starting to brown, it's starting to lose moisture, and then it's starting to smell like bread and hay and a lot of different smells going on. And then it's in the same time it's expanding, and then it gets to that first crack. And once a lot of roasters will use log sheets for this, and because if they want to make the same coffee bean do the same thing over and over again, it's just like a beer recipe, right? With a beer recipe, you want the same mash temperature, you want the same amount of hops, alpha acid wise, same IBUs, and you want to try and make the same beer recipe. It's the same with coffee. All right, I dropped the beans in at what temperature? It took me how long to get to yellow, from green to yellow? Boom, I mark that and I write that down. And then it takes me from there to first crack. How long did that take? And we mark that down. And you log temperature and time, and you do that all along the way until you get there. And there's software out there for good roasters that have a curve where it drops down and then comes back up. You might have seen some stuff like that. But you're basically trying to get coffee, to that state. And And then, and the mistakes you make as a home roaster are, well, I roasted it and it tastes like it tastes like it's baked, right? Well, I roasted for too long. All right. If you roast it too fast, right, then what you end up with is a lot of undeveloped green flavors because the inside never cooked fast enough, right? And the outside got dark, right? And so you had too high a temperature and you cooked it too fast. So there's a lot to play with coffee to try and get everything to do it in a certain amount of time. And you know, you're trying to build something or find something that's going to roast it in, you know, a 10 to 14 minute window. And then, you know, can you go longer? Absolutely. All right. Can you, you know, when you start talking about like Vietnamese coffee or, you know, where the Vietnamese coffee is a whole nother world, but they slow roast everything. But they hide the bake flavors with chocolate, vanilla, everything else they add to it. So, you know, it's a huge topic we could start to talk about, but from an application standpoint, it's way more fun to see who's roasted, and what their experience is. Because I mean, I've burned a lot. I've turned coffee into charcoal. You have to do it in order to figure out what you need, to where you're trying to get to. There's lots of different, you know, there's so many topics to talk about, but I'd like to get some discussion going and some questions going from people that have roasted, and see what you guys are experiencing, what you're thinking. So let's start there.
So, question.
Yeah.
Speaking of the making charcoal out of beans.
Yeah.
So I've always heard that like Starbucks and places like that burn the shit out of their beans.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like they like roast it for fucking ever and then it loses a bunch of flavor, or what?
No, there's a lot of people out there that like Starbucks coffee. If you were to take, they do over roast it. Their medium roast is what most people consider a dark, right? Their pike is what a lot of people would consider a dark roast, you know, or pretty close to it. The reason that they bring it that dark is because it's just not quality beans. They buy their beans super cheap, as they should. They're huge and they have stock in all these fields. But if you were to take a bag of and anybody can do this, take a bag of whole bean pike, right, and dump it out on a table and then, you know, or into a bowl, and then take a bag of, you know, a coffee you buy from a local roaster and dump that in, and just look at the quality of the product, right? The beans are like half beans, pieces. You know, the Starbucks is just whatever you get, whatever they got, you get, you know. But the as far as the roast level goes, yeah, they the beans that they have lend themselves better to a darker roast, and that's why they go there. So it isn't necessarily burn the shit out of, but it's it's definitely darker. And you see it with dunks too. I mean, the only way they're going to get the flavor that they want is they're buying beans that are, and we could talk about altitude and way that what that changes in coffee, because high altitude beans have way more sugar, they roast better, they're expensive, right? And so when you start to talk about, you know, higher altitude stuff, they stay away from it. They're buying all the low altitude beans. And so the only way they're going to get there and get some flavor into it is to roast it darker.
I have a question about the use of the beans, like drip coffee versus espresso.
Yes.
Almost all my coffee uses for espresso. So I know that there's different, considerations there, and and it's sort of like you're talking about. There's sort of some conventions that say like, oh, dark roast is for espresso, when in reality, no, really, really burnt beans make shit espresso.
They do.
So I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Like, so for someone like me, if I'm interested in really, really, focusing on just that type of use of coffee, what are the things I should be looking for?
It's so when I think of drip versus espresso, I think of the grind only. I don't
Really?
think of
Okay.
a color level of bean. Now you see, an espresso roast, all right, is different than talking about making a cup of espresso. And
Right, yeah.
so
Yeah, the espresso roast usually means burnt or like French roast or something like that, way at the dark end of the spectrum, when really good espresso is made from really medium to lighter beans.
I have no idea why they call an Italian roast an Italian roast. You go to Italy and it's like all light. It's not light roast, but it's
Right.
medium,
Right.
and they make amazing espresso. And they usually will take and they roast it the same day. If you get a good espresso in Italy, they'll be roasted the same day. And that's
Oh.
usually not the case
Okay.
anywhere else,
Mhm.
But they're delivering beans to the coffee place. The roaster is like daily, and so they get them, they roast them, and then they boom, they make it an espresso same day, and it's worth trying yourself.
Okay.
Is it's definitely some of the flavors are muted, but it's super creamy smooth on
Mhm.
day one.
S-
But if you
Well,
really want a lot of that coffee flavor to show up, then you got to age it 3 days to 4 days usually per bean.
okay.
Yeah, but usually when I think of espresso versus drip, drip is a much coarser grind,
Mhm.
right? Versus espresso, which is super fine like powder.
Mhm.
And then you keep going in the grind level to Turkish
Right.
coffee.
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah, we do. I just do lines with a credit card, and but
yeah. Hey,
yeah.
whatever, dude. I tell you, you got to lay off the Trillium.
Okay, that's great. That's really helpful. I mean, I try different suppliers, but it's interesting. It's interesting to learn that it's the distance between the roast and the brew
Right.
versus the harvest and the roast that
Yep.
makes the bigger difference.
Absolutely. And I'm going to get this
Okay.
out of the way right now. Let's talk about caffeine, right?
Hmm.
Light roasted beans have way more caffeine than dark roast.
Hmm.
Dark roast may taste stronger, but there's way less caffeine. They've roasted the caffeine out of it,
Hmm.
right? So if I want espresso and I want it to have some punch, I'm going for a medium roast coffee, right? And I want it whole bean and I want to grind it myself till it's like, a powder.
Hmm.
I actually have a separate grinder for just espresso
Okay.
that I can make pucks with, just things that you collect.
Hmm.
But yeah, I would be looking for something that's and I would also be looking for beans that it all depends on what you want for flavor. I stay away from fruity coffee and
Hmm.
espresso just because I don't like that. Some
Hmm.
people do, right? I go more to things that will give me like flavors of cocoa or chocolate or even darker fruits.
Hmm.
Normally that takes a darker roast to pull some of that out, but it's I try to stay away from really citrusy, fruity, coffee, which then we can get down the road of talking about process, but we'll keep the questions coming.
Let's throw it into that direction then, because one of the things that annoys me when I go to espresso places that serve a really acidic, astringent type of, and I'd say more fruity than earthy type of espresso shot. What accounts for that? I'm not 100% sure where that comes from. I think I have more taste towards yours.
Yeah, well, what'll happen so there's processes of them when they pick coffee, right? There's what I would want and you'd like to hope that a good coffee shop would do is either use a wet processed or a washed processed coffee. All right, and wet processed is basically taking and so understanding the coffee is a seed. It's not a bean, it's a seed, and it comes out of a cherry. It's a coffee tree, and it's a coffee cherry. It looks just like a cherry, and the bean is inside, and normally it splits into two parts. Now, washing process just completely dehusks and washes that out of the cherry fruit, and then it allows it to ferment about, I don't know, usually a couple of days, and then cleans the rest of it off, and it's a very clean cup of coffee, you know, and that usually tends to lend itself better to the terrier and getting some of the flavors that you're looking for in espresso. Where you start to get in a natural process. Now, natural process is, let's take the coffee and throw it out in a field, right, or on tarps, right, and let it dry until like the cherry is a raisin, right, and then after it's dried out, then get rid of that process. Well, a lot of the fruit flavor has ended up in that bean, right, from the fermentation process of that happening. And then the middle of the road is now the like honey process. I don't know if anybody's heard of honey processed coffee, and it has nothing to do with honey. It's taking the outer skin of the cherry off, leaving the fruit on, and then letting it do the same thing. But it goes through a yellowing, then a red, then a black, and there's more fruit involved and a lot more. But natural processed coffee is a lot more fruity and usually typically more acidic than just washed wet process. But a lot of times you can't find out what that is. But if you go to a good roaster, they should know what they're roasting, you know.
So I had a question about all the roasters you've gone through. So I've seen a lot of plans online for like building Franken roasters, you know, using popcorn makers, roasting ovens, bread makers, heat guns, etc.
Yeah.
Have you had an experience with any of those different do-it-yourself options, and are those even worth the going down to do it at home, to do it well, or is it more just like think about spending $500 and getting something of quality?
If I was to do it again, I would spend the money. But I learned a lot. I don't want to take away from the learning how to MacGyver your way into roasting coffee, because there's a lot you're going to figure out in the process of the heat gun. I have one set up at home that's got, I took two heat guns and took the elements out, and I had a fan blower, right, blow into a black iron pipe through one heater, right, up to an elbow to a second heater, to a like this cone at the bottom, and then a glass tube, and then I put a big screen around it, and the coffee would sit, and as it would go through the heat, I could dial in the heat on both those elements to get the temperature right, and it would just float the coffee right on the air, and it would blow all the chaff away, but it made a real big mess in the room. But that hot air process of roasted coffee is a very clean style of roasting, and you just got to play with temperature. I learned a lot there about how to go too fast, how to go, you know, what too slow is. Yeah, I encourage both. I encourage the spend the money on a roaster, right? But don't stop playing, because you'll eventually get a roaster where you're like, I love what this does, I love what that too. You might end up blending those two together. You know, blending coffee is amazing when you start getting certain flavors out of, you know, because again, you bring everything back to the cupping table, right? And coffee cupping is a whole nother topic. I can't even get into it, you know, tonight. But basically, taking what you've done and actually putting it on a scale. It's almost like the BJCP of beer, and doing that. Except you're looking for those flavors. What are you pulling out at different temperatures? Yeah, back at you. So I totally, you know, let's have the conversation, you know, text me, email me, tell me what you're thinking. I could probably, if you haven't already found something online that's like it, you know, I love people that get into it, but spending the money on a roaster so that you can have coffee now is like, okay, I'm done messing with this thing. I just need to roast something really quick, and I just get it done.
Can you
Right.
talk about the different types of roasters? Because there's like drum roasters, then you said like kind of this hot air one. There's kind of ones where there's like you kind of provide like, you know, heat from above and just stir it and stuff like that. And
So the most conventional that in the commercial world is a drum roaster, and it looks like a washing machine, except it's a cast iron drum, and it spins, and it's got air flowing through it. It uses conductive heat that you're heating the drum up. It uses convection heat because you're pushing air through it, and you're throwing the beans up in the air, and then and between the two of those, you know, you're able to roast. That's the basic drum. Now, a hot air roaster, the first guy to ever develop a hot air roaster was a guy by the name of Civets, and his roasters are still in use today. He built big commercial roasters that were hot air roasters, and all it does is push air up through the coffee and creates this big floating, you know, mass of beans that just slowly just cooks the beans, and you can watch if it's through a glass tube, you can watch it happen, which is the neatest thing ever. I'm trying to think of the guy out in Seattle that builds the roasters. I mean, they're not cheap. Nothing's cheap. There's also Sono Fresco is one air roaster that you can get as a home roaster. You could look that up. SONOFRESCO. I think it's they're out of California. They're built out there. You can get a 1 pound or 2 pound, and that's just filling a glass container with beans, sticking it on there, turning it on, and you know, do it outside because you're gonna get chaff everywhere. So basically, those are the two. But that's not as a home roaster. If you're trying to do a small batch of coffee, you know, you could get into. I built a popcorn popper that had a metal arm, and it would just spin, and it would just keep turning the beans over and turning the beans over, and that worked. That made some pretty decent coffee as long as you had the temperature right. So but right now, I mean, the drum roaster is the king because it's the easiest. You can actually, in a drum roaster setup, a well done commercial roaster, you have a set of beans that are already sitting on top, and you have a door in the front. And when you open that door and let the beans out, as soon as you close that door, you can put the next batch right in. And while that bottom one is cooling, you can get the next batch going. So that, you know, from a standpoint of not having to wait to get the roast started again, that's cool. That's things that you can't do as a home roaster, where you're done, you got to get that out, you got to cool them off. One of the things that from a roasting standpoint that everyone should probably know if you haven't roasted coffee before is after you get to the end of a roast, you want those beans at the roast level they're at. You want to get them into something that you can cool them very quickly. The first thing I ever built was I took a Home Depot bucket, I put a colander in it on the top, and I put a hole in it with a port for a vacuum cleaner. And I turned the shop vac on, and I sucked air down through the beans and out the bucket, right, into the vacuum. And that cold air coming in, right, and you stir the beans with a wooden spoon, and you were cool within a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And that keeps the beans at the roast level they're at, or else they're going to keep cooking. They're at, you know, 400 or between 400 and 450 where you like them. And all of a sudden, if you don't stop that by cooling them down fast, they're just going to keep cooking, especially on the inside. So, so that's why when you see a roaster, a commercial roaster, you've got a drum for cooking in, you've got a hopper on top for beans to sit in, and then you've got a cooling tray, which has got a completely separate fan and a completely separate mechanism underneath to get exhaust out and get the beans cooled off fast. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What else? Throw stuff at me.
Hey Pete, have you heard anything about Dean's Beans coffee roasters, good or bad?
Dean's Beans.
Yeah,
Um,
they're a Massachusetts company. They've been around for quite a few years doing organic coffee out
Yeah,
in
they
Mid-State, Massachusetts.
organic.
I haven't. I've heard the name. Do they have a roaster now themselves?
I'm not that familiar with it. I think they've had it for a few years, but they were kind of like kind of like really kind of into the home scene for basically providing coffee and also roasting your own beans.
Right. Yeah. So I've only heard the name. I haven't had any of their beans or their coffee before. There's a lot of little coffee roasters out there. You know, it's a world. It's an adventure, and they're gonna take beans from wherever they get them, and they're gonna roast them their way on their machine, and they're gonna taste probably different than anything else, that you've had, and you just gotta try them, and if you like them. But I don't have any real experience with them. What else?
Is there
Talk a little, or no, go ahead, Trey.
is there any difference for how you roast those beans if your intention is making cold brew, or
That's interesting.
in our case, if we're going to brew with those beans, are there ramifications of certain roasting levels?
So, if you want the beans, the beer to taste like charcoal, then we cook them all the way till they're burnt. Yeah, I mean, I think, DT, you and I went through this where we were drinking a beer. I don't remember what it was. I know it was a coffee beer, and we didn't like the coffee flavor that was in it, right?
Yeah,
And
like a green coffee bean flavor.
that's what it had. It
With
had
green
either.
pepper.
It was interesting. It just reminded me of a light roast coffee. I don't drink light roast coffee myself. It just tastes underdeveloped, and that's what I was getting out of the beer.
Right.
Again, people are brewers. They want to express whatever they're going to do. That's great. I think, in depending on what you're looking for, one of the things that's on my list here to brew is a blonde or a white stout. Basically, you use whole bean coffee, right, to get the coffee flavor into that beer without adding color. But I would opt for a darker roast to try and get some of that caramel, because you get a lot of caramel, a lot of cocoa, a lot of chocolate notes out of darker roasts than you do out of medium roast, which still has a lot of fruit in it. So I think, from a cold brew standpoint too, I've had cold brews that taste way too fruity, and not my deal. Some people love it. Some people love that. From a nitro standpoint, you can't hide anything in a nitro beer, especially with coffee. You don't ever want to put nitro cold brew on CO2 at all. It will make it taste horrible. You have to be straight nitro, 100%. So you can't hide anything at all in that. And so whatever flavor you're getting. So I think a dark roast tends to lend itself into stouts and into beer development. But I think, again, that's just my preference of what I like to drink, and what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for a coffee flavor, I'm looking for something that's pretty well developed, and not a coffee that's underdeveloped. That wasn't good. I could pick
Just
that up in a second.
talk about I have a couple of random questions. So one is that when coffee growing people talk about fermentation, what the hell are they talking about? If it's not fermentation like we talk about it.
No. When they talk about fermentation, they're talking about the natural fermentation of the fruit that surrounds the coffee bean, and how and when the coffee bean is still intact of that fruit, how that fermentation of that of that basically eroding piece of fruit is going to affect the flavor of the bean. So the longer there's fermentation going on, right, the more fruit, the more it affects the final what you're tasting in the cup.
Okay, so it is at least something a little biological, unlike the tea people who just say fermentation, they really just mean oxidation.
Right. That's
okay, the other completely unrelated. Yeah, the unrelated question is, what sort of coffee brewing processes are you generally doing with these beans? Like, are you doing like pour overs? Are you doing like drips? Are you doing AeroPresses? What's going on?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
The answer is yes. All right. I have in my possession, I got the Chemex, the AeroPress, the French press, the V60 pour over. So I mean, it's 2 pour overs. Both a little different between that Chemex and what you get for flavor. And then just standard drip, and then the espresso machine. After you get into having making espresso, as Mark can probably go off of after a lot of Trillium, espresso is a whole different animal and everything. But I find that different coffees fit different types of things. Like I mean, anything can be drip. You can make any coffee you want into drip. Is it all good? Not really. But it comes down to how is it ground. If something's really acidic, you can play with water to change that. Yeah, I mean, I think the best cup of coffee that you're going to get is probably out of an AeroPress. For me, I think an AeroPress is absolutely spectacular. For a single cup, can't go wrong. Just make it happen. Doesn't matter what the coffee is. It's going to make it taste good. French press is good. Pour overs are difficult. Pour overs, a lot of people love pour over coffee. Those are usually people who like really fruity cups and like coffee that's more medium roast, and don't mind acidity. But there's a great app, and I got to find it on my phone, that for just doing it, and it gives you all the timing, because one of the big things about forget your drip, forget your espresso, but one of the big things about doing French press, AeroPress, or pour overs is timing, and how much you let that coffee steep in water, or how long you take to pour it over and everything. And I'm gonna find it. You just got to give me 2 seconds. Here we go. It's called Coffee Guru. And when you look at it, when you open the app up, it gives you all the French press, V60, Chemex, AeroPress, and you just click on that, and then it will give you profiles for how long it should take to do it, and it's pretty spot on. And I'll tell you that in the same way that everybody likes a different beer, I feel like everybody likes a different coffee. I like this, I like that, and I find that everybody's palate's different. So, and then everybody will find their form of what do I like to drink out of. So,
all right.
What's next? Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, going back to the roasting, is there like a book you could recommend, or a couple of books? Like maybe what's the equivalent of the Joy of Brewing, or John Palmer's How to Brew, kind of a really basic intro book, and then at the other end of the spectrum, what is the Kuntz textbook that if you're going to do a crazy deep dive? There it is.
Scott Rao, The Coffee Roaster's Companion. Order yours today. I have no stock in this book. I pulled it out though because I knew I would get the question, because it's got there's so much in this book for what it is that that kind of gets you going down the right road of the whys and the explanations of taking every like little piece that I've talked about and just blowing it up. So this is a great place to start book wise.
Can you grow coffee around this area?
I have not seen it grown. I have not seen it grown. I think
Can't
the
survive
only
the winter.
I think the only place in America that they really grow it is in Hawaii, and everybody's familiar with Kona. And you know, real estate in Hawaii is expensive, so therefore, coffee farms are expensive to run in Hawaii, and therefore, you know. But the coffee's good. More chlorophyll in Kona beans than I've seen in any other beans in the world. They're so like dark green, amazing, and you know, when roasted right, I mean, even if they're roasted raw and cooked, it's pretty good. But other than that, and you know, it's no Canadian coffee, sorry. But Mexico grows some good stuff. We can go there. No, never mind. What else?
So I have a question. Is for those of us who are probably not gonna set up our own roaster or something, or maybe we are, what can we do with commercially available products? You know, is there, like, say if we find a brand that we like that isn't roasted enough, can we roast it some more? Is that even a thing? Or like when we're talking about like roasting on beans, are we talking exclusively buying green beans and then taking them the distance ourselves?
Right. So you're not taking a bean that's already been through the process and trying to advance that. It will not
Okay.
end well.
Okay.
Did that a few times, tried it. I'm like, yeah, not good.
Okay, so we can't fix other people's beans if we think, oh, you know, I like this, but it's almost, but not quite.
Right.
We got to start from scratch.
Yeah, I think you know, going through your own coffee journey, everybody's gonna sort of find first off a roast level they like.
Okay.
Right. You're gonna kind of find, hey, listen, I really like fruitier coffees, and you're gonna tend to lean towards a lighter or you know, into a medium roast. Whereas if you really like darker, you know, coffees, you're gonna tend to go down that road, and then from there, then you know what you're buying, because at least you can try, you know, different stuff. Now, you know, very interesting to work around the world, and you know, Ethiopian coffee, all right, is at different altitudes is very different, and then looking at what the process is, because after you start figuring out what roast level you like, then you can start nailing down, okay, what area of the world do I like my coffee? Do I like Sumatra, right? Do I like Mexican, or you know, El Salvador, or Brazilian, right? And you know, okay, I have a roast level. I have a bean I like. Where's it grown at, right? Oh, this is grown at you know, 3,000 feet above sea level. Great. Then I like now I know I like this at this roast level, at that sea level, and then you start looking at other countries for that, and just keep doing the research on the coffee you're buying.
Okay. Or build a tower in our backyard that gets our coffee plantation at 3,000 feet above ocean level.
Yeah, you could do that with
right?
Trillium cans and start those going up. Yeah, and then backfill.
Right. Oh, well, of course, obviously, yeah.
So here's one. So we're all brewers because we like the process of brewing, but it also lets us sort of like make whatever we want. So what can we do by roasting our own coffee that we couldn't do just by buying coffee?
Well, that's so there's the satisfaction of whether it's good or bad at the end of the day that you made a beer, whether it's good or bad, you're drinking that, and it's yours, and there's pride in that, right? And it's I think it starts off the same with coffee. right? It's like, wow, I roasted this, right? And you know, the amount of times I brought my mother a beer, right, and she tapped me on the cheek and said, "Keep trying, son. You're almost there." Right? Your wife's going to tell you the same thing about your coffee. You know, just the fact that you could buy. Let's say you went down the journey of, I like this roast level, I like this particular bean from, or this particular, I like Brazilians, I like whatever, and stop laughing, DT. and I like it at grown at 3,000 feet, right? And I'm like, I like this natural process, whatever you say. Now let's try figuring out how to roast it myself. I find those beans green, right? Sweet Maria's, or that's probably one of the best places to buy from. And you actually go on their website, because they got forums of all kinds of people building roasters. And you could buy so many different kinds of coffee beans from them, and from all the different parts of the world. But and try roasting yourself. And can I get it? You know, I would love this bean, but you know, again, just back to what Mark was saying. Well, I want to fix this bean, right? How can I fix this bean? Well, the first thing is to get it in your hands green, right? You got to start from green, and then now you're on the journey of trying to get that bean into your coffee cup. And does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, but is there also like an angle on freshness? Like there's no way I can go to the store and get something that was roasted 3 days ago, and that's why you do it yourself at home? Or is it more just being able to tune it precisely to your taste?
I think it's both. Because you're gonna learn. Well, what you are gonna learn is you're gonna learn what fresh coffee tastes like and what stale coffee tastes like, and you're gonna start looking at dates on coffee instead of just buying it and saying, "Wow, this was roasted, 6 months ago," versus something that you roasted. Is you can watch, you can taste it, you can put a cup, do an AeroPress and do 1 cup, on day 1, on day 2, on day 3, and see how that bean is developing and where you like it.
So much like making fresh beer, I'm going to ruin a lot of things for myself.
You're going to ruin stuff. Absolutely. Don't ever think that you're not. But you're gonna learn a lot in the process. You didn't, your first batch of beer, very few people get it right. You drink it, but very, very few people got it right. But I think this is where, a trip here and a walk through a coffee roaster and looking at time, temperature, and the way we roast beans can help a lot of people either A, figure out a design for a roaster that they want to go down this road and MacGyver everything, or quickly figure out maybe I need to buy something and then go down the road that way. But in the same amount of anything, any reason why we brew beer, and the same thing about that was the whole reason I started roasting coffee, is I wanted to buy bean. It wasn't cheap. I wanted to buy it green, and I wanted to get that flavor myself. So, and figure out how it's.
So when you walk into a place that roasts their own coffee beans, like a coffee shop or like a roaster, what are the things that you look for to know that these people know what they're doing, right? Like I can walk into a brewery and look around and see like, this place is, unclean or whatever, or, I have less trust in them for whatever reason. What are the things that would cue you into they do things right, they do things wrong, or whatever?
Coffee shops are harder than breweries. Breweries, you're looking for sanitation. In a coffee shop, right now, let's talk coffee shop versus coffee roaster, right? Because if it's a coffee roaster, then we're talking about a different animal that roasts their own stuff. And so I'll use the example, if anybody's ever been up to Little Wolf. They're the closest coffee roaster to me here. They're in Ipswich. They've been open a while, and The guy comes from Portland, Oregon. He roasts on a Probat, which right away I know that the guy knows what he's doing, right? But he's got the Oregon, Oregon, whatever you want to call it, mentality of, right? I get that mentality of there's nothing other than a medium. If I go into second crack, I've ruined the coffee bean, and that's just so untrue. Because some people like dark roasts and don't knock that. But I look for, I really can't tell anything until I taste it. That's really, I'm not looking for anything in particular. Everybody's going to know how to make an espresso. Everybody's going to know how to do stuff. One of the things that Mark's question earlier about talking about espresso is if you have a really fruity coffee set up in your espresso machine or in your espresso today is this, and it's like super fruity, and it's a medium, it's a medium or light roast or a city. I don't know. I don't know what you're thinking. But if I tried it and I loved it, you guys know what you're doing. So it's a lot harder with roasters. I need to talk to the guy who's behind the machine. And a lot of times with a coffee roaster, the guy behind the machine is not the guy who really originally had the passion for it. It's somebody who was programmed to, all I know is I take these beans, I put them in the top, and I bring it and wait till it goes to 435 degrees, and then I dump them. And that's, that guy. But with the small roasters, you can usually tell they know what they're doing just by tasting their stuff. Just like beer, man. Just like beer.
I have a question. Some places nitrogen flush their bags. Does that make a difference? I know, like with hops, obviously the nitrogen flushed and packaged and supposed to drive away oxygen. Is kind of the same idea with coffee as well?
It doesn't go stale. Yeah, you either want it nitrogen flushed. If you can't get it nitrogen flushed, a good vacuum seal is fine. Vacuum seal in the bags pulls as much air out as you can get. Not all of it, but more of it. So the thing with coffee and again, I've done these experiments, is that coffee doesn't necessarily get worse as in a bag that's partially closed or whatever. If it's ground, it's all of a sudden on this timeline of you got to use it faster. But if it's whole bean, right? I got coffee that's sitting in my basement, and the bag's open or just rolled up and not, and I roasted it 6 months ago, and I still am pulling it out and drinking it, and it's delicious. So, the nitrogen flushed is I think it's good for if it's something that was, I'm looking at a date and it was roasted 6 months ago and it says nitrogen flush, well, it's going to be pretty fresh. It's going to still taste pretty good. But some people don't want to grind their own coffee. That's where I look for more than anything is I try to never, ever buy ground coffee. Always buy whole bean and grind it yourself. And that's going to be way fresher and taste way better than something that's already ground. More than the nitrogen flush.
I've noticed in the supermarket, the bags of coffee, whole bean coffee, there's like a valve or something in the side of it. What's up with that?
That's so when coffee is done and going through the process of it's still degassing, right? Even after it's done and it's cooled, it still degasses. Some more than others. Some roasts levels are more than others. But that degassing can actually turn the coffee bag into a coffee bomb, like a bottle bomb. That's if you want to think bottle bomb, right? That valve is an actual degassing valve that allows the CO2 to come out of the bag, and degas that so it doesn't build up too much pressure and puff up. And not all of them have that, but the ones that do, if they've been traveling for a while, it definitely helps. Because you can vacuum seal a bag A fresh I just pulled it out of the roaster. It's cooled off. It's in a bag. It's vacuum sealed. And then go back to that bag, 3 or 4 days later, and it's all of a sudden loose and everything's shaking around inside. I'm like, I vacuum sealed this. Well, the beans degassed off some, and now there's CO2 in the bag.
So I've got a nerd question.
I love
a lot of us here are self-admitted nerds. We've got pH meters, we've got meters for this and that and the other. Is there anything we can bring to bear of our homebrewing tools on pH and I don't know what else that could help us better fine-tune what we do with coffee?
I think when you were here last, we started talking about water. And water
that's what you were talking about what you can do with RO water. That would be, yes, please go into that.
So, in making a cup of coffee, water's the biggest thing that's gonna give you flavor. Take away flavors that shouldn't be there, right? And allow flavors to be there that you want to taste. And playing with water and grind, you can get yourself the perfect cup of coffee. I have been using RO water for years for making coffee, but what I do is I run it through a remineralization filter, which adds calcite. So it adds calcium and magnesium back through back into the water and raises the pH up. Raises the pH up to about an 8, right? And so if you have a very acidic coffee, it can help with that. It also only adds in and gives you back the flavors that you really want to taste, versus when you took out the chlorine and you took out everything else that you out of your tap water from the RO, those are still gone. And that's the flavors you're trying to get rid of. I've played with all the brewing salts, from the Epsom salt to the calcium chloride to the calcium sulfate, and you can manipulate water, and the black coffee can taste amazing. All right, but also, what do all those salts do? They lower pH, right? So if you lower the pH of water and you get it down to a certain point, as soon as you touch it with cream, it just instantly curdles. It turns into chunks, right? So you got to be careful, which made me go the other direction. I wanted to turn my water into a base, right? And that way, when you add cream back into it, which my wife drinks constantly, and I don't diss people who drink coffee with cream and sugar, because I'll tell you what, I can't go to.
I do.
I can't go to a Dunks without making it into a candy bar, because I just can't take it. Rough. But
thank you.
Yeah, so water's huge. If the worst comes to worst, you gotta just go pump RO water, or buy spring water, or through a filter and filter it through to use for your coffee. That can help too. Some sort of purification.
I got a question. You're in Beverly. Do they have their own water supply, or the MWRA water?
Beverly Salem has their own water supply.
And how is it? Is it? I went to Salem State for 5 years. I don't remember drinking the tap water when I was there, but I don't remember it being particularly great. Does it make it harder to brew a decent cup of coffee, not to mention a decent beer?
Not if you rip everything out of it. I got an RO tank out back. I got a 1,500 gallon a day RO system that I take everything out of, and then I deionize after that. So there is zero TDS left in my water. It may fluctuate up to 10. I change the DI filter. But and now for coffee, right? Once you get it to 0, right, or somewhere even in the under 30, I know that a lot of coffee people will start to talk about blending wastewater back in when they use an RO system, because they, if you do use straight RO water, with coffee, you'll end up lacking a lot of flavor. That's why I ended up remineralizing and putting stuff back in. But a lot of the, if you look at water filtration for coffee systems, they have a blending valve on them so that you can blend, wastewater from the RO system back in and add TDS to try and get it to, I think the optimum for a lot of coffee places is like 100 to 125 TDS. But I've found if I run it right through this mineralization filter, this calcite filter, I could send off a link to you guys to where to get it. It's like $35. If you have an RO system, you can just put this on the end and then unhook it and hook it up when you want to make coffee. Fill up a gallon and let it sit on the counter and pour it in your drip filter, on your drip maker when you're ready to make it. So, what else?
So, quick question about beans. So, like, my brother was telling me about, like, the Ethiopians use, like, a natural process where, like, they let the cherry dry with fruit on it and all that versus, like, the washing and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And it's supposed to give, like, very different flavors, like fruit, wine kind of type of stuff.
Right. Yep.
Is there, like, when you buy beans, are you looking for that kind of, like, oh, okay, I want this very specific flavor and how that's going to come out in this, if I roast it this way?
Yeah, you are. A lot of times, with Ethiopians, I would prefer to have a washed. Again, when you look at coffee farms throughout the country, right? Most coffee farmers don't process the coffee themselves, right? They take the coffee to a central location that is a coffee processing station. And depending on the processes that station allows is what that farmer can get and get out, right? So in Ethiopia, there's certain places where you can only get natural process because that's the only way that they can get it done, right? And there's other places that you can get it washed. I start buying, if I'm going to buy a Yirgacheffe, I'm usually going to buy it washed, right? And not natural. There is some really good natural processed stuff coming out of Ethiopia. I mean, it's amazing, but it's hit or miss on whether or not the fruit flavors are what you want. And you could buy a whole lot of it to find that you don't like it. And it takes, and now the coffee world is so that if you buy a small sample, I want to take the sample, I want to roast it, and I want to see what it gives me, and then I want to buy some, it's gone. So you got to take a shot at, am I buying enough of this to run for a couple of months?
And what's a sack of coffee? Is that like 60 pounds? Like, what is that?
A sack of coffee, one sack of coffee is 50 kilo.
Okay.
So it's 2 grain bags.
Yeah.
So
20 pounds.
Yeah. So it's heavy. You could buy it from, like, I could buy it from Genuine Origin in boxes, in smaller boxes, 22-pound boxes, like hops almost. But again, a lot of people shop on there. And so because, you say, oh, can you send me a sample? Sure. Right. I'll only have them send me a sample of something that is, they have a ton of, because then I know if I like it, I can get it, and I think that's really the only way. Or I bought this tiny little roaster, right, that I can roast 200 grams in, and it's hooked to a gas stove, a Coleman thing, right, and it's a little Caldi thing, and if I wanted to, drive to New Jersey to, like, Royal Coffee, and I wanted to sit out in the parking lot and roast 200-gram samples, right? And then stay overnight, and then next morning take and do all these cups, see what I liked, and then buy the coffee right then. That's probably the way I would go about it. Other than that, I'm kind of going off of what they say the flavors are, and then process wise, knowing that the process and knowing that, okay, that's going to give me a lot more fruit versus a lot cleaner, cup of coffee. I tend to, there's some naturals I buy, but for the most part, I try to stay with wash stuff because I know that I can, if I can't make it work in a roaster, I can blend it. if that helps you.
So I assume it's like hops where like at some point you could get a contract for specific beans so you can make sure you always get them.
Yep. And you can make contracts directly with farms. Direct trade. I mean, you hear a lot about fair trade. Fair trade versus direct trade. Direct trade is actually way better for the farmer. They get a heck of a lot better money, where fair trade takes a lot of money from them to get them on the fair trade program. So, if you can get a farm and get that same farm growing coffee for just you, that ultimately and it's the stuff you like, that's ultimately the way to go is, to have those, just like someday, the alchemist has got his own hop field in Yakima Valley, and he can pull, his Simcoe right from the same place every single year, right? It's the same thing with coffee growers. If you want to be able to have those same flavors in your house blend or whatever, you're eventually trying to do that. Until then, you're just like I'm doing as a new brewer. Where am I getting Citra today? Oh, look, my buddy down the street's got a contract with Citra. Maybe he'll give me a bag, or you just don't know. So coffee's the same. You just kind of playing until you find something you like, run with it for a little while, and eventually, if you get big enough, then you start working on contracts.
So my friend DT wanted to know about decaf coffee.
Yeah, what about it?
Can you make it?
Decaf for quitters. Yeah, so so decaf's the thing. There's different processes. One of the processes you probably most people hear of is Swiss water process, where it's actually they stew the caffeine out. That coffee comes to you. I have some here. Comes to you a lot darker. But some of it's good. Depends where it comes from, and really there's the thing about how fresh it is. If you get your decaf fresher, it's way easier to roast and way better but it also roasts way different. You can't go as dark with it because it's already darker. You can't tell when it turns yellow and because there's no green left in it when you get it. So it's a lot harder to roast. And so, but it's a thing, people want it at night or whatever if you can't sleep. Can you sleep, DT? Is that all right? You struggle with needing caffeine?
Never.
Yeah, I think
always sleep.
Doug was doing the asking for a friend thing, which meant himself.
Yeah. I've had a couple of
Thanks for the explanation, Taylor. I missed that.
I've had a couple of decaf winners that I've run through in small batches, in like 10 or 15 pound batches that I've tried, and when I went back to get it again, it was gone. So it's really tough. It's tough. You got to just kind of wait for that one to come around again and jump on it. Or it's just kind of like when Galaxy comes out every year, and it's like, oh, I gotta get some. Yeah, same thing.
So the old roasting drums are made out of copper, and I'm assuming everything now is stainless steel. Is there any flavor difference between something that's been roasted in like a copper drum versus like a stainless steel drum? Is there something that's either gained or lost?
I think copper was really, I don't ever remember seeing copper. I remember seeing a lot of stainless, but I see mostly cast iron. Copper may have been a long time ago, but then they moved to cast iron. Cast iron holds a lot of heat. The problem with that is that you got to let a roaster warm up for at least an hour.
Wow.
Before you get to even put coffee into it. Because you want the roaster at temperature, but then it will roast the beans the way you want them, and it's consistent, you know. And then stainless steel isn't as good a conductor of heat, you know, conductive heat. It still throws them, but it doesn't hold that heat that cast iron does. And so you don't get you'd get in a stainless steel roaster, you'd get more heat from convection than you would from the drum itself. And again, it would still make good coffee, but you're working with what you got. You know, I think there's merit to both ways of doing it, but I think for me, I love a good old cast iron drum because it's just it's easy to you know, it's mellower on the coffee. You don't have to get as much your airflow perfect as you would with a stainless drum where it's got to be, you know, spot on. You know, or it has to be higher and a lot more airflow in a stainless one. So roasted on both. I've loved the coffee out of cast iron more than stainless.
Going back to kind of a home brewer's thought process.
Yeah.
What is like the lowest tech way of doing this? Like, could I just spread out green coffee beans on a sheet pan and do this in my oven? Or
you can, and then
you'll turn the most manual thing?
It'll turn to Mexican jumping beans eventually. First crack. And so one of the things that you'll start to notice about, and the tough part about the frying pan or the sheet is you could do it, right? But there isn't any coffee beans that are all the same size, right? When you get green coffee, you're gonna have they're graded a little bit, but smaller beans, bigger beans, you know, there's variation. And so the smaller beans are gonna do what? Cook faster, right? The larger beans are gonna take longer. So you're gonna end up with, you know, stuff that's underdeveloped, overdeveloped if you don't move it around, right? So I say if anybody's gonna start roasting coffee from, you know, put it in a frying pan and just start stirring, just like the old Jiffy Pop, right? And keep the beans moving. Or buy yourself find an old Jiffy Pop, not Jiffy Pop, like a Whirly Pop, air popcorn popper, and you can get 50 grams of beans in that popper, and you can sit there and turn it on and heat them up and watch them spin, and that's the easiest, fastest way to get into roasting your own, is to get it. And you could Google the snot out of that, and there's so much out there on how to do it, what to do, what to look for, videos, YouTube videos, you know, and you can plug it in the wall and do it in your kitchen. Maybe you probably want to do it on the porch, but yeah, it does make a mess. Yeah, it's because one of the products of roasting coffee is chaff, right? That's the outer skin that's still on there, right? And that chaff is going to come off, and as you go through the roasting process, and it's going to blow up, and yeah, it's going to make a mess. So I would do it outside to start.
Yeah, it makes a huge mess.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you're going to spend a few $100s, go on to either, you know, buy yourself a B-More, like one of those toaster oven roasters. People sell them used all the time. You could find them for, you know, 100, 150, 200. You know, I think you can buy them new for 350 or 400 bucks. And it's a little drum roaster, right? And I could teach you guys how to manipulate that sucker to make it so that it does what you want. And you can, you know, you're looking for more of the B-More Plus than the B-More itself, but you can roast some pretty good coffee on that and be pretty happy with it.
Do those separate the chaff and kind of like, you know, make a less mess?
No, but it keeps the mess contained inside the roaster.
Okay.
All right, and there's a smoke filter on the back, so that you still would want to do it outside unless you were in a room with a fan that sucked everything out. You would still want to do it outside, and run an extension cord out. But it's 110, so it's not like it's a lot of voltage or anything else. And what I used to do with mine is I would take a fan, like one of those fans that has the small ports that would blow like a blower, right? And I would open the door as soon as the beans were where I wanted them, and I would drop that thing around the door and blow all the air in, and all the chaff would come flying out at me, right? But it would cool the beans down way faster than the roaster did, and I would get better coffee. And then once it's warm enough, it's cool enough to handle, you take the drum out, and you get those beans and still have to stir them and cool them down, but not as much. And then you just vacuum out the roaster, right? And all the places where there's chaff, you just have a little shop back there, and then you go right back to it again. It's slower than, commercially, but it's still, you can get it done and get a few batches done in an hour.
So have you used beans that you've roasted at home in beer and everything?
I did use beans that I roasted at home in beer. It's a great reason to want to roast. I mean, I think that's where a lot of breweries started roasting. Like you got, I'm trying to think of Colorado. Who makes Dale's Pale Ale?
Oscar Blues.
Blues. They started roasting their own coffee. They were one of the first breweries in the country to do it, simply because they wanted to put coffee in beer and they wanted to be able to roast it themselves.
So when you were roasting coffee for beer, is it like, do you think of how you're going to roast it differently? Like, so is it like I'm brewing something for the purpose of distilling, and I'm going to magnify specific flavors because I know that like other things are going to get stripped out? Do you like make considerations that maybe the coffee you make for beer might not be good for just a cup of coffee?
I think if it's going to be, honestly, think about it from a beer standpoint, right? If you want to put chocolate in beer, you're going to find chocolate you like the taste of, if you're going to put vanilla, I mean, you want it, you smell it. I'm like, well, I want something that's more pungent. I love the smell of, these Madagascar beans. I'm going to put those in. I think for coffee, it's the same way. I think if I definitely like in beer, I like darker, like a lot darker roast, like to French roast, right? More so, and the flavors that gives beer, because they're stronger, they're more coffee-like, right? Versus, where you put into a medium to a like a full city or to a dark, and or not quite the dark, you're going to end up with more fruity flavors and not taste like coffee. So yeah, a little bit, but not. Again, I want it to taste like it's coffee in a beer. So therefore, I'm going to roast it darker so it actually has more of that flavor. What else?
Okay, I'm sorry, I keep monopolizing the questions here.
No,
One
you're
of the
fine.
styles I tasted, and I'm trying to remember the brewer that I came from, it was a Helles with a coffee addition to it. And I thought it was great. So a lager with a coffee flavor. Normally we think of coffee flavors with porters and stouts and darker beers. This is a coffee flavor with a lighter beer. Is there anything you can advise us for, again, on the beer brewing side, handling coffee beans, brewing, cold brew, regular brew, anything like that for successful use of coffee beans in various brewing styles?
I think what I do more than anything is I make a cold brew,
Okay.
A concentrated cold brew, and I use that into the coffee. I don't put the coffee grinds directly into the beer. I steep it and make it as concentrated as I can, and then add that to the which is again why I tend to go to dark roast, because more of that goes in, and the longer you let that steep and get in there, the more flavor you're going to get. From a Helles, right? It wasn't a dark beer; it was just a regular light Helles with coffee flavor. So they didn't grind the beans at all. They just used whole bean in order to get that flavor in there without having to. Because as soon as you grind it, what happens? It's just like making a cup of coffee, right? But you run water through it or anything through it, it makes it darker. So that's what I would do is you just use whole bean coffee if you want to keep the beer light.
Thank you.
Sure.
Not a question, but a comment. Far From the Tree in Salem made a coffee cider once that was weird but good.
Nice. Was it light in color?
Yeah, it was like normal cider.
Nice. Yeah. When they first came out with the white stout, which still throws me for a loop, and they added a white coffee stout. I had one. Where did I go the other night? When I was picking up Todd's chest freezer. I stopped at Faces, and they had a blonde coffee stout, which actually was reddish more than anything. They had gotten some of the coffee to go in, but it was really good. But very, very light color. See right through it, But that's how you do it, is you use whole bean.
So the one I was thinking of is this and That from Cambridge Brewing Company. I have it's Beer Wolf. I don't know how they pulled it off, but it's a Helles lager with single origin coffee. I'm trying to see where the single origin was, but I just thought it was a great blend of the things I like about coffee, minus the darkness.
Right.
With an otherwise, with what we expect from a lager type coffee or lager type beer, excuse me. I was impressed. I liked it.
Nice. Yeah, but that's how that's done.
There is Karamo washed Sadama, Ethiopia. No idea what any of those things mean.
Excellent. Yeah. Sadamo's high altitude.
Okay.
Ethiopian. So,
okay.
And what was the first part?
It's Karamo, Keramo, washed, whatever that means.
I'm not sure. It could have been. It's a washed coffee, which means it's pretty clean.
Okay.
So.
I just kept the can because I said, hey, here's some aspirational sample to keep on the rack by the kegerator.
So what I'd kind of like to make, next steps for any. I mean, I know that we're in the middle we're still in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, I'm open for business. So I mean, if we're up for club meeting, around a coffee roaster, and anybody wants to learn how to roast, or if we want to split it up into a couple of nights and offer it to different people and whatever, I'd like to take more discussion and actually turn it into application so that you guys can actually roast some and actually take it home and drink it, which I think would be a lot of fun. We could have because we could drink beer while we roast coffee, because that's what I do.
I can say all the taps are going to still be available, right?
Absolutely. they never shut off as long as you're in the building.
Oh, I'm all up in that. I mean, I'm a big espresso fan. I would love to learn more about what makes the espresso that I like to drink. That would be great.
Sure. And what's really a lot of fun is when I first start with a bean, I'll drop, I'll do smaller batches and drop it at, a 410, a 420, a 430, a 440, a 450. And that's pretty much going from light roast to 450 being pushing French. And that's the temperature range that you're looking at. And you can look at all those different ones, and we could do 5 batches of the same bean. and do them all, and everybody take home a little bit, and then come back on a Zoom meeting and talk about it. We have a lot more to talk about if we're all drinking the same coffee, and what everybody's getting for flavors and notes. And I mean, this could be a lot of fun. This is just a start, because coffee is a huge topic.
Now you got to do a beer with coffee roasted at 420 and add CBD oil.
Got to bring smoking something into this, didn't we?
I was going to say that's going to have to be a morning meeting.
Yeah.
But then DT went off into right field, and I just don't know. I guess at 4:20 p.m. is the right time.
Yes. For him, it's 4:20 a.m. It doesn't really matter, does it?
Nope.
He's just
Twice
putting.
a day.
Yeah, for him, 4:20 a.m. He's just getting done drinking for the night.
Would a coffee beer? Would you make it differently if it was one of your cask beers? That I know you run like 3 cask beers at a time, or 2 or 3, whatever.
Yep.
Would you treat it differently or roast it differently if you were adding coffee to one of those?
I probably. Well, again, I think it all depends on the style you're trying to create. I mean, for me, I like all the cask beers to be lower alcohol session beers. Just the way it is in England. If you go over to the UK, you're drinking something out of a cask, and it's somewhere between 3 and 5%, and usually not over that. And so, I wouldn't add as much coffee to it, but it's worth exploring, because I'm going to add 2 more cask bowls. I got to have get to 5. I think got to be the goal. Because then I can have those one-off experiments that, like you're talking about, like an English dark mild with coffee.
Cask IPA.
Yeah, I just brewed an English IPA today, pilot batch, but not with coffee in it. I had who is it that makes is it Stone makes a coffee IPA? Somebody makes one.
I know, there was Denver Brewing Company had one. They were doing it a while ago, but I assume somebody makes one in more commercially.
Yeah, I know I've had one.
I think I had one in Tampa, Florida, or something like that.
Oh yeah, Cigar City, I think has one.
Cigar City's got some cool coffee beers, but I haven't had an IPA from them that had coffee in it.
Yeah, I think they.
You get coffee CBD beer and call it Wake and Bake.
Wake and Bake.
Come on, it's all about the branding.
Thought
you couldn't put CBD in beer yet, or can you?
Yeah, Stone's Dayman.
You can because
of the state.
Hemp is legal now federally.
I know Wake and Bake is already taken.
Oh, come on.
Brewing. There's probably like 18 others.
Yeah, it's a state-by-state thing now.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but
CBD oil on coffee beans.
But alcohol is federally regulated, so the federal government can decide what can and can't go in it.
Yeah, but I think you can make CBD beers because I think hemp was federally legalized this year.
The crazy thing is where you want to sell it. If you want to sell it within state versus sell it interstate, that also factors into it. It's a mess.
I think CBD has always been federally legal. We just didn't know about it as much because this THC is the kind of verboten compound.
Yeah, just a little aside though, I get CBD oil shipped from Denver. They ship to all 50 states. I'm pretty sure it comes to the USPS. So whatever they're doing passes the sniff test because they don't F with the USPS with illegal stuff federally.
Well, USPS has nothing to do with the federal government. It's like a trade association. It's a pharmaceutical society.
Also, a reminder, if you bring a CBD beer to a meeting, it should be labeled as CBD beer.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's my fault. Mostly sorry for who was it? Was it Vince?
I didn't drink it. I was close. That was the only beer in that 4-pack I didn't drink was that.
Yeah, that you gotta blame Mr. Shirley on that one. he didn't even tell me. He wasn't even a club member then. Where is he anyway? Sorry, Pete. I didn't mean to hijack.
It's all good. Nobody has any questions, then let's end the coffee discussion for the evening, since we're all already pretty much decaffeinated. Right, DT?
Right. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording unless anybody else has a question. It's your last chance.
Big thank you to Pete.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great.
Hey,